I haven't met you. I don't think I've even talked to you, so you're one of the ones that I haven't.
Mystery. Well, nice to meet you now. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
very good.
All right. So let's see. Just wait for the clock to reset.
Oh, Gene.
Or if somebody just wants to time me on the
Yeah,
phone
we
or
could.
something.
This will be an easier one than the 90, I think. But
I don't have videos, so
what do
that's
we want the time at?
15 is, I think,
Around
what I was
15.
told.
All right. I'm going to have to just get down to 15 from 90.
We're not using your time for this.
Okay. That's
I'll give you the full 15. I won't wipe
all
it
right.
out 14.
Well, I was going to say nobody wants to give me 90. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right, there you go.
Holding you to it. Ready to roll? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, hi. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name's Krista Westerberg. I'm an attorney at a firm called Pines Bach in Madison, and Glenn McMurray asked me to be here today. I'm, like I said, an attorney in Madison. I've been practicing going on 24 years, doing mostly environmental, land use, zoning, and energy law, but a lot of water law over the years. And so that's why I'm here to give you the kind of the legal context as you're looking at regulating wake boats. So next slide, please. So I'm going to do this in 3 parts. The first one being just generally speaking, what is your town authority? Next slide. And it starts actually in the Wisconsin Constitution. I think we've had some early dates. We've heard today, the dam went in 100 and odd years ago. We heard the first power boat was in the early 1900s. Well, I'm going to go back even further to the Wisconsin Constitution, and before that, with the Northwest Ordinance, which was the predecessor to Wisconsin and the Wisconsin Constitution of 1787. Which says that it contains our public trust doctrine, and that says the river Mississippi and the navigable waters leading into the Mississippi and St. Lawrence rivers and the carrying places between the same shall be common highways and forever free for all citizens of the United States and Wisconsin citizens. So you might say, well, what does that have to do with anything? This is not the river Mississippi, but the carrying places in between the same have been interpreted to include inland lakes by Wisconsin courts. And they have broadly interpreted, next slide please, the public trust doctrine to include not just commerce and floating your log down the river, but all these things: fishing, swimming, travel, boating, recreation, hunting, natural scenic beauty, clean water. Case law over the 100 or so years that we've been interpreting the public trust doctrine has recognized all of these rights. And why is that relevant to the town? Next slide, please. Well, who administers the public trust doctrine in Wisconsin? The state of Wisconsin is the trustee. The legislature does. The Department of Natural Resources does, as delegated by the legislature, and so are local governments, again delegated by the legislature. Next slide, please. And the public trust doctrine, again, like I say, it's been interpreted broadly, and it is affirmative. It creates, it's active, and it creates affirmative duties. It's not passive. It's not saying you can do stuff if you want to. Going back to this case that's almost 100 years old, it says the trust reposed in the state is not a passive trust. It is governmental, active, and administrative, and requires, skipping down, the lawmaking body to act in all cases when action is necessary, not just to preserve the trust, but to promote it. So you don't see that kind of language very often, but it's here, and it requires governments to do things. So what's an example of this? Next slide, please. Well, as this area well knows, there was the lawsuit that the first speaker referred to from back in 2011, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, about high capacity wells, and the concern there was the well was drying down and changing the chemistry in the lake. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, well, the DNR has to issue these high capacity well permits, and it is required to consider the environmental impact of a proposed high capacity well when presented with sufficient concrete scientific evidence of potential harm to waters of the state. So that's just one example of when the courts have said, yeah, a governmental body which has the trust delegated to it has to act. And so another way I interpret that holding, next slide please, is you just, when you're faced with trouble and you're faced with harm and you're faced with problems, a trustee cannot put its head in the sand and has to do something. So what does that mean, again, for towns? Next slide, please. Well, the town has been, this town and others have been given authority by the legislature to enact voting ordinances pursuant to the delegation of the public trust in the interest of public health, safety, or welfare, including the public's interest in preserving the state's natural resources. You've got to do it consistent with other provisions of the law. There's the procedural steps to enact a voting ordinance, and the town, of course, would know this because it's already done so in the existing ordinances that it has in Chapter 16. So that's all by way of background, when it comes to wake voting, to say, next slide please, the town of East Troy has authority to pass a wake vote ordinance. And in light of specific scientific evidence of harm caused by wake votes in the town, discussed by prior speakers, in my opinion, the town should pass an ordinance regulating wake votes. And, the science that we've seen so far, I think, has actually been very strong, more strong than you typically see when a local government is making a decision like this. You've got statewide studies or nationwide studies conducted by a variety of organizations. You've got the Terra Vigila study, which is really interesting because it's site-specific. It is specific to this lake. It was done here. And I think you've heard at other meetings, and I'm imagining what you'll hear today is testimony from lake users as to the effects that they have seen. And shoreline impacts, lake bottom impacts, aquatic invasive species, and impacts to all those other uses on the lake that were shown in that earlier slide, the fishing, the swimming. I mean, wake boats, they're only concerned with one of the things on that list, which is boating. And the town has to protect all the other interests and all of the other uses of the lake that are protected by the public trust. So we're not just here to talk about boating. Okay, next slide, please. So part 2, well, okay, you have the authority to pass an ordinance. You probably should pass an ordinance. But what are the advantages of doing that and having a wake boat specific ordinance? So next slide, please. And because obviously you do have the option to do that. What's the alternative? Well, we have got existing ordinances on the books that apply to all watercraft. Maybe we should just focus on enforcing those. But I would say an ordinance specific to wake boats is a better option. Next slide, please. Kind of those advantages of a new ordinance are on the left of the slide, and the enforcement of existing ordinances, that option is on the right. I think ordinances are, an ordinance specific to wake boats is a good idea because it is more clear and it is specific and people know the rules up front. Instead of just referring and relying on general language like you've got to operate at reasonable and prudent speeds under the conditions. Another advantage, and I think this one is really important, is that it prevents harm. If you do enforcement, the harm has already occurred and you're trying to go backwards in time, but some harm takes a long time to undo. And it's better just to deal with things on the front end. This is sort of a classic debate in environmental law. Do you prevent with a rule or do you just enforce on the back end? And when you're talking about the environment, I think preventing harm is a good choice. A new ordinance is less costly. Enforcement, as you know, I think I heard like there's going to be a $50,000 donation next year to do more education and marking and things on the lake. Enforcement is costly. Education is costly. For that matter, I mean, not that you shouldn't do it, but if you can just make the rules up front, then you're not spending money on boat patrols and things like that for enforcement. And then lastly, you can avoid neighbor conflicts and even maybe litigation between neighbors because you are handling as a legislative body these things up front. I heard today, and this, of course, I created before I heard some of the discussion today, the wake boat advocates are saying, well, we're really not all that different from other kinds of boats. We don't need a rule that's specific to us. But it just doesn't seem consistent with the facts. We've seen a lot of evidence to that effect. And also, wake boats are designed to be different. They aren't designed to be like other boats. They're designed to operate differently, and it's reasonable for the town to do something to address those specific types of operations. So those are some advantages of doing an ordinance. Lastly, I'll go to my third part of the presentation, which is there's some considerations for an ordinance. Next slide, please. How do you do it? Well, you could just amend the existing ordinances that you have. In Chapter 16 about voting, I think that would be the most natural place to have an ordinance specific to wake boats. You could look at ordinances enacted by other towns. There's plenty of models out there. Next slide, please. You should observe, of course, what the statute says in Section 30.77. That's, again, the part of the statutes that delegates authority to the town to enact these restrictions. And the case law says, that should be local, recognize local condition. It's got to be consistent with other provisions of the law, and it has to be done in the interest of public health and safety. There are some procedural steps, like you've got to get DNR advisory review and et cetera, but it's all very manageable. You should observe other case law. And I would say you want to observe other case law and you want to observe rights, but not be intimidated by it. So, some of the litigation we've seen, I think it was mentioned earlier, this Town of Scott case is like, oh, we're riparian voters or owners, we have rights, we should be able to use our wake boats. But riparian rights are not absolute. They are subordinate, actually, to the public trust doctrine and public rights, and they are only entitled to reasonable access and use. They do not own the lake bed. The state does. So, don't be intimidated by that argument if you see that. There is also an argument that, hey, we have a boat. We're trying to use our public trust rights too, but that can be curtailed. There is case law that says the right of the public to use navigable waters isn't absolute, subject to state and local power to ensure that such rights are exercised in a safe and orderly manner. So obviously, no boater has an unconditional right to use the lake however they want. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to be accommodated. The Town of Scott litigation, I think that will be an interesting it'll be interesting to watch that and see how that case goes. But in my opinion, it's probably not likely to succeed on the merits, just like cases from other jurisdictions have not. And finally, you want to observe the science. Again, you've heard some really good presentations today on that. That would support a ban, that would support a 500-foot setback. You've heard the 200 setback or floated as well. I think that probably doesn't make sense given what you have seen. And again, because I hadn't seen the earlier presentations before I prepared my outline, I just wanted to address some arguments that I've heard today in the course of the presentations from the wakeboat advocates. And one is that you should let other levels of government handle this. And I guess as somebody who does a lot of this work across the state, you see these arguments typically from people when they don't want government to act. So this isn't not my first rodeo in hearing some of these arguments, but let the state legislature deal with this, let the DNR do it, let other levels of government handle it. I would agree with one of the earlier speakers that the legislature is not likely to do something. The DNR, even if it wanted to enact some rules, it takes a couple of years at least to get rules passed. And it seems like you've got harm now that should be addressed. And the town is the best situated governmental entity to do that as somebody that is closest to the problem and most familiar with your lakes. Also heard, don't address wakeboat problems until all the other similar problems have been addressed, caused by tubers and water skiers, and we've got sedimentation from all sorts of problems. We need to address all of those things first before we can address wakeboats. Not the case. You have the authority under state law to and the science to address wakeboats. They have a specific problem they are creating. you don't have to solve all of the problems before you can address that one. The opponents of wake boats are just relying on emotion, and speculation is a word I heard. I don't think that what I saw today in the presentation with the first group of people is what I would call speculation. There is science to support a ban. There is a science to support other solutions. And you can also rely on public sentiment. Again, you're supposed to protect the public health, safety, and welfare, and your constituents are going to tell you what the best are the best source of that information for you. A related argument to the don't address this until you address all the other problems is treat us the same as everyone else we think is like us. Again, there is a distinction between wake boaters and others. And everyone loves a compromise, but that doesn't mean a ban isn't reasonable. You can do a ban. There is certainly enough evidence for a ban, and that seems like the simplest solution. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had my eye on the clock.
Right on the buzzer. Thank you.
Thank you.